As an announcement, we will be changing our posting schedule for this project. If you're curious about our new schedule, you can check in the description of this episode or the description of the podcast or YouTube series for more information. Now, I hope you enjoy the episode.
Return to love again and again and again.
Hello, and welcome to our 9th episode of Winding the Circle as Sacred Story. So we're your co-hosts. I'm Sky Williams Tao, and I use they, them pronouns.
And I'm Jamili Omar. I use she, her pronouns.
And in this episode, we're discussing the lay leader of color avatar in Winding the Circle. And the question we are considering is, how do we care for souls? So we'll get into that in just a little bit, but first I invite us all to get grounded in whatever way that makes sense, to maybe put our feet flat on the floor, if that's something that makes sense for you in your location or with your body. But think about grounding yourself and who you are and where you are. Maybe check a little bit out of the podcast to check into your surroundings. Maybe taking a breath in and out, and letting yourself settle into this place and time where we are together across the interwebs and across space. And I will read our opening words, our chalice lighting words, as Jamili lights our chalice. We return to love again and again and again. We value what is true. We honor holiness. We try and we grow and we fail and we rest and we try. We are here together now. We need one another. We covenant.
So we talked in an earlier episode about the purpose of these avatars, and they serve a really important function in the book and in the collection of the testimonies. And we talked before that there are a lot of folks that weren't willing to give these testimonies again because they had testified and been ignored or harassed or in some other ways let down. Nothing has changed. And the folks giving their testimony were seeking some anonymity. And so these are compilations of different stories. And also the committee was looking to make sure that those voices were heard in the document. So they serve a really important function too, I think. And that's why we wanted to examine these avatars as standalone pieces, because we want to lift up the fact that there were a lot of people that took a lot of risk in order to share these stories with us, and we want to honor that testimony.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, just like to reiterate, like the commission did a lot of interviews. Like they did talk to a lot of people. So it's really coming out of one thing, like I think that's also valuable about these avatars is they really anchor us in these lived experiences that people have that are, some of the chapters are can be or feel, I think, a little more abstract, but this is really anchoring us in that lived reality that is, I think, actually sort of the base stuff out of which this report is made. Like, I think the commission sort of started from that interviewing, started from talking to people, started from, doing different ways of thinking about that, and then came to these broader categories and recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really important. And that's how we came to this episode's question is how do we care for souls? Because as we were reading and discussing this particular avatar, we felt all the different ways that this person, as a person in their wholeness, their beingness wasn't cared for. And we also really debated that word souls. Do you want to give us your interpretation of that word? Because I know that we'll have people that will say, well, but I don't even believe we have souls. What do you mean by souls?
Yeah, I was one thing I was reflecting is I do think I feel myself drawn more and more to like religious language and to really, because I think it pulls us in a particular direction. So one thing we were talking about with souls is this idea of you think of a person as a self or as like a mind or a body, and I think us using the language of soul asks us to go a little bit deeper than that, to really think about what is precious about this person, this human being, this this unique sort of soul in this world. I think it also pulls us in the direction of faith development, of thinking about this person as a spiritual and religious person, by using that sort of explicitly religious language to really to center this person as a religious being, right? Which, because one of the things we're reflecting on is that part of what our churches do is this faith development of people throughout their lives, and thinking about some of the ways that went really sort of horrendously wrong with this particular person who entered this church. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, and that went horrendously wrong with this avatar. It was really pronounced for me, even in the a third paragraph of their story, is that the avatar Mallory talks about how they found Unitarian Universalism through justice work, which a lot of our congregants do, and we are very active and very proud, as we should be, about the justice work we're doing out in the world. And people find us and are looking for a spiritual home for their souls. And this particular testimony starts with, after a couple of months of attending service and a book club, the minister asked me to join the board. And when I read that again, my first response was, how, I want to use the word irresponsible, of this system to take somebody who is so new in Unitarian Universalism and ask them to take on such a profound leadership role where we haven't been nurturing that person all along. And there's reasons why, even when we're short on viable people to be on our board, we really do want to consider, is this a leadership position that's going to feed their soul? And is this going to help them develop and grow spiritually? And I think there are leadership roles that do. And I think we can definitely grow our spirituality or our soul through leadership work. And it was clear this wasn't the right time for this person, in my mind.
Right, which I know, I think is this question of volunteering, and especially in the modern day more generally, right? Like, especially with younger folks, because like, generational shifts around not like the value of wages declining and not paying people in commiserate ways with in ways that allow them to access good standards of living that include time off. Like the volunteering patterns are changing, mainly because people just have less time to volunteer because they're too busy working to survive. And so I think like in that, there's also this question of, really having volunteer positions that are like, how is leadership in the church not just a thing that sort of you're expected to do? It's a thing that, but how is it a thing that is feeding your soul? It is genuinely part of your faith development journey. And I think something like the board, I think actually like really can be that. But I think part of that is, giving back to a community that's given to you, right? And like, if you've been there for 3 months, there's just not that
reciprocity.
Yeah.
Is it reciprocity that this congregation has not yet been the safety net for Mallory, that this congregation is taking, like, come in and be our leader. And then on top of that, the microaggressions towards their leadership and the dismissing of their concerns over and over again, so that they finally felt like they couldn't trust and have the support in the community that they came looking for.
Right. And so also this piece, right? I mean, thinking about the chapter on governance and governance being about power, this, in a way, I mean, like this is an inviting somebody into a position of power without actually wanting to give them any power, like without actually being willing to listen to them, without being willing to hear their, you know, like the concerns of their soul, I think is one way to say that. But yeah.
And to, you know, the fact that the way that Mallory came into the church was through social justice, and then to be consistently shut down and dismissed when Mallory brings up social justice concerns is also a way of, I almost want to say, gaslighting, that they set her up, they set Mallory up for failure, that here's somebody with a very clear articulated passion, and now we're going to undermine them every step of the way. And this feels like gaslighting in a way.
Yeah, and just to lift up what you're saying, or just to lift up the piece there, that is, we were talking before this about what gender Mallory is, and we could not actually find a gender in here. So I think I used they, them pronouns, you know, she, her, we, he, him. We don't actually know what pronouns Mallory uses. So just as a note, as we're discussing this, right? Oh man. And then I had another thing I wanted to say off what you said, and it just flew out of my brain. Oh yeah, the intersectionality piece, right? Like it says explicitly talking about, you know, that everybody was sort of would look at Mallory when discussing race, but when they had a thought about, you know, pronouns and more sort of queer issues, that was like kind of erased from who Mallory is, or is not. It was not just like it feels clear that they were not considered in sort of their wholeness and in the ways that they bring multiple facets of who they are or who Mallory is to the table.
So how do we answer the question, what do we learn from this avatar? You know, what do we learn from the situation with this person? Clearly, it might be easy to dismiss as this is one person, one congregation, but I think there's something bigger to learn from this.
So this is, I mean, one takeaway I think I have is actually around theology and spirituality anchoring our justice work, and in ways that allows us to, I mean, because one part about this, right, this is a church that seems to be involved in external justice work, or at least in the sense of like, they were, I think, at this Black Lives Matter rally, but were clearly not internally reflective about their own like selves, the way their systems were working, right, the way this was in their governance or their church, like that sort of dissonance, I guess, between this sort of doing activism in the streets, showing up for protests, but not having it really be part of the sort of fabric of their community.
Which means it also didn't become, there's a lot of looking out at the system that we live in, and not a whole lot of looking in at the congregation and how the congregation replicates white supremacy culture, replicates heteropatriarchy, like all of those things. Like, how does that come into our congregation and our relationships with each other? Again, in ways that are really dismissing and demeaning of people's beings.
Right. And like I guess I think of the theological angle, because one of the things I've been thinking about is like where in our like places in our theology that really speak to why this is a problem. And I think one of those is around this idea of caring for souls in the sense of like, like soul taken to mean people's like sort of vulnerable selves, their entire selves, their wholeness in the ways that we can, right? Their religious and faithful selves, their as sort of like this, they're like not their worth that they produce, not their sort of capitalist dystopic number self, but their like human self. And that like clearly Mallory's experience was like incredibly not recognizing them in that way, or not recognizing Mallory in that way. And I do think theologically, like, I think that's like the anchor for me is like, like the inherent worth and dignity of every person, but sort of almost like deepening that in a way, or like holding that in a more spiritual way. I don't know, like something with it. And then that being sort of where theologically I'm like, we're not doing that in our churches, and we should be, right? Or and not even like neutral. I mean, we're actively harming like Mallory in this situation, I think, and recognizing that we're sort of talking about Mallory, and that Mallory's experience is reflective of folks' experiences in our congregations, and
Right.
more than one
Yeah.
person's experience or congregations. Like I'm sure they want to, like, this avatar is a composition of a number of people's experiences.
Mhm. Yeah. And that I'm thinking about the the board secretary, a white woman, immediately centered herself in her own discomfort, framing the situation as attack on herself by me being Mallory. That by doing that, and by allowing that behavior, we say that comfort for some is the purpose of our church. That is comfort for some at the expense of others. And your tie back to our theology, that's not actually theologically sound, that it's not centering the comfort of some over the pain of others. Even as we think about the principles changing, it's not there.
Right. And it makes me think of the conversation actually we were having about governance, but this idea of like, what does it mean to really put our values in the center of the church? Or what does it mean to put our faith in the center of the church? And that, that one of the things, if we're not intentional in thinking about that, I think one of the things that lives at the center of our church is comfort for white folks, is comfort for the folks who are, in our churches, who are benefited by the way they work as they work now. And again, like that our churches are not like separate and cut off from the rest of the world, like we're reflective of it. Yeah.
And that for me, there's a very profound call in our theology towards growth. We say it explicitly in our principles, the free and independent search for truth and meaning, but that means that we're actively searching, and that we're actively growing, and that it is a really critically important piece of what we're doing together. That does not exempt us from conflict, that we don't get to say, oh, no, we're not going to have conflict. It's uncomfortable. We have to have conflict because we have to grow. And that is theologically grounded for me, that there is a call for that in Unitarian Universalism. We all get to grow constantly. We get to grow and change, and it's hard, and it's hard work to do. And I think at certain points, the ministers that were in the system weren't pushing anybody to grow, or weren't asking or inviting anybody to grow in the system. And if we're not growing, we're dying. So,
yeah. Which I feel like is very resonant with my brain's like was very resonant with the trends section. I mean, like, Like
There's
that's
very
the
much internal
reality.
consistency. There's internal consistency in this document. So, we can cheer for that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. And it makes me, um, like Mallory's growth, the growth of this church. I guess my brain is in the space of like what could have been, or like um what would we wish for Mallory? I guess what would we wish for this church and for Mallory? Given, like clearly, yeah, I guess that's my question.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go back to Adrienne Maree Brown and, moving at the speed of trust. I think that was the first mistake on everybody's part, or the first misstep on everybody's part, is there was no trust between Mallory and the congregation, but going both ways, that they could be in relationship, be in covenant with each other, and when things got hard, come back to covenant. And to slow down that relationship building, and really to do the relationship building, to slow down the leadership, and to slow down the we think, oh, we have this new young person. She, Mallory's only 35. We have this young adult who has all this energy, and let's put them in all of the things. But we haven't done the important thing of building relationship. And so to slow down and to say, to build that relationship, where do you fit? What do you want to do? What feeds you? And so that the church system is feeding Mallory before we're asking Mallory to give back. And that was the first misstep in my mind. If I could have done something different with Mallory, I'd be like, no, don't volunteer there. Get to know us, make friends, get invested. And then start to give back. But how can we care for you first?
And I think part of that being for me also, I would wish for Mallory and for this church, or this congregation, church terms, that they were already doing this work, right? I mean, that Mallory's not, that they were intentionally doing work. And so, Mallory's voice is one that could help add to that could, bring another richness to it, but that Mallory wouldn't have to feel like they were the one who had to keep being like, hey, maybe put pronouns on the name tags, like maybe we should do more with this white supremacy teaching thing, and push that, not just have it be a day, that there was that Mallory could have trust that was going on,
Right. But that takes, there's a level, not just trust, but transparency.
Yeah.
Right. The fact that it got pushed to the end of an agenda, and then we tabled it, and then it didn't get up again, and somebody was ignoring my emails. There's not transparency going on. I think if the congregation could have said, we hear you, this is an important issue, we can't do it right now, Mallory might have left on their own, and Mallory might have been able to stay and weather that system long enough to see that idea come to light again. But without the transparency, the conversation wasn't happening. Mallory doesn't know.
Yeah, and I don't think in this example that the church is actually holding it at the center. Just to clarify, I was speaking more towards what I would wish for this church is that they were already doing that internal work, and that, Mallory could join that or not. Whereas in this case, it feels very much like Mallory is sort of having to keep push it. And I hear what you're saying about, I do think there's also that level of even if you're doing the work, right? I mean, people have to know. Otherwise, they can't be trusted. People just don't know what you're doing. And I think really very, I'm also thinking about the relationship building amongst board members around some of that, I don't know if that would actually be possible here in this example, but being in a space where Mallory felt like they could bring concerns, or where Mallory felt like they could Mallory felt like Mallory could bring concerns up at the board. And like, you know, the board is clearly being very dismissive here, but like what I would wish for them is that there was enough relationship to have a conversation, or to have a, you know, have a meaningful conversation about how even agendas are created, right? I mean, I think that's an incredibly, like we talked about in the governance section, nominating committees as a site of change. Agendas are absolutely like you're controlling the topics of the conversation, right? Or like thinking about with boards, right? Like when are decisions made and how are those made, are all absolutely I think valuable questions to have as a board, and they're questions often I think that do take that sense of relationship and trust and covenant, and like, you know, and being able to say hard things and feel like you will be heard. Yeah, and that, yeah, again, that's clearly not what was happening here, but yeah.
And it's instructive because we have congregations and churches that are on the whole spectrum of not doing racial justice to doing racial justice and in between. And so what can we learn from situations where it wasn't successful? And part of that is the trust building and the communication and identifying where the power is. Yeah. What else? Was there anything else in here that we haven't touched on that you want to get to in this avatar?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that sticks out to me is just this Mallory left piece, and just around, I have this memory of Reverend Sophia Betancourt, like talking about the grief around people leaving, and thinking about like, one thing I think this avatar does, right, is like, we see at the end paragraph, right? Unwilling to encounter this on Sunday mornings, I stopped attending. Though I finished my board term, I missed meetings. I dropped out of the book club and no longer attend anything at the congregation. Like, where I think sometimes that can be like, oh, they're not showing up. Or like, you know, like, or somebody's like, oh, I just got busy. You know, like where, like, how do I say this? Like, we're seeing all the root causes of this eventual outcome. And I think, at least to me reading it, it's like, yeah, of course Mallory left, like, you know, like, but I think sometimes we only see the last part and not, I mean, okay, I also want to check my language there on like but like, I don't know, does that make sense? Like the way in which this shows all of the causes, and like the way that outcome was sort of this inevitable, or it feels fairly inevitable outcome of all these little things and actions that the minister took, that the board took, that the board secretary took, that other members of the congregation took, like, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the culmination of the microaggressions over time that it probably wasn't the one last thing, but that was the, what is it, the straw on the camel's back, right? It's the one last little thing that makes everything topple over. And so to see all of that told, you know, this didn't just happen in one day, it was over time, really points out how easy it is to overlook microaggressions, that it's one comment, it's one misstep, it's one thing, but that over time sour the relationship, and we haven't cared for this person in the way that I know that we're capable of.
Yeah, that's
the disappointment, is not that they left, because people leave churches and congregations all the time for good and bad and different reasons, you know, and it was because the congregation didn't care for that person's soul.
Yeah, and yeah, the part that also resonating with me is like, is in the way I know we're capable of, right? I mean, like I am in this faith. I've experienced places where it feels like my soul is being cared for. And so I believe that Unitarian Universalism is capable of that. And so like there's a, I don't know, like tragedy, grief around seeing that, or around that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Seeing our own flaws, and that we know that we are better, we can be better, we should be better.
And that, like, I think it's, like our responsibility as religious people to live into covenant and into our theology. And so it's not just, like we could be better people, but like we are Unitarian Universalists, like live what it means to be Unitarian Universalist in this world. And that's
Which
what
I'm
it means.
super excited for that chapter. What
Yeah,
does it mean to live in the
yes.
world? Yeah. Well, and that's it too. I don't know how much we got into this in the theology section, but that our theology is very much a lived experience theology. It's not a end times, there's a better time coming. It's today, here and now. And for us to do this good work here and now with the people that we're in relationship with, yeah, that's very much who we are.
Right. And so I think like, when that's not what we're doing, right? I think then the question is, what are you there for then? Like, you're not there to care for souls. Like, if you're not there to care for our souls together, our covenant, like what are you doing? What are you doing there? Like, or what am I doing? I mean, I don't just mean to point the finger at other people, but I think that's a question.
Yeah. Yeah. Which actually brings me to my challenge for the action for this episode is I was going to invite you just to go care for your soul. And that's really just kind of too far, too nebulous for me. So as a religious educator, my challenge is to do something within your faith community that develops your soul, your faith, your spirituality, your spirit, either by taking a class, attending an event, going to a workshop, learning something new, is to live out our goal of growing and learning all the time. And in that way, get in touch with your soul, see what it needs, and how you can feed it. I think that's all for today, Sky. Go in peace, go in power, go do good in the world, and go knowing that you are loved.
At the end of the podcast, we'd like to say a few thank yous. Thank you to Unitarian Universalist Justice Arizona, or UU Jazz, especially to Janine Gelsinger and Phoebe Dubich. And thank you all for being with us. Remember that you can contact us at uusacredstory@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.